Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, a really fun weekend of basketball for the Wolves. They split a pair of games at New York and home against the Cavs, but lots of positives to take away from this weekend. We're going to start there today. We'll talk about some neutral observations too. We'll get you ready for Wolves-Grizzlies tonight, but a big weekend overall for the Wolves. And I think we can all feel a little better about where the Wolves are at right now. We'll break it all down. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is sponsored by Prizepicks. Now's the perfect time to join. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prizepicks. Run your game. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day today. Lots of NBA action today. Of course, the Wolves have a matinee against the Memphis Grizzlies. We'll talk about that toward the end of the show today, but a lot to get to after a fun weekend of Wolves basketball, competitive games against some of the best teams in the league on both Friday and Saturday. Of course, winning in Madison Square Garden on Friday and losing a relatively close game, a competitive game for most of it against the Cavs on Saturday. So what we're going to do today is start with the positive takeaways. And I'm going to cover both games. So we'll talk about the overall takeaways from Friday and Saturday. And then we'll talk about some neutral to maybe some slightly negative. Well, certainly some slightly negative observations from the weekend as well. We'll close by previewing today's Wolves-Grizzlies game as well. All right, a big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder, you can subscribe to the Locked On Wolves newsletter daily, Monday through Friday. Just go to LockedOnDaily.com. If you're on YouTube, you'll see the URL there in the corner in just a moment. But again, LockedOnDaily.com. One stop for ultimate Wolves coverage, ultimate NBA coverage delivered right to your inbox. Notes from this podcast, as well as some national articles and some additional links to more Wolves stuff too. So go ahead and subscribe at LockedOnDaily.com. All right. Let's go ahead and get into weekend takeaways. And Friday, of course, the Timberwolves were in MSG. No Karl-Anthony Towns for the Knicks. Of course, no Dante DiVincenzo for either of these games for Minnesota. And the Wolves ended up beating the Knicks by 17. This was a close game until the fourth quarter. The Wolves were up by, I think they were up by 4 at halftime, up by 3 going to the fourth quarter. And, there were some moments like the third quarter was a good example. Like overall, the Wolves played great. They scored 116 points. They held the Knicks to 99. There was some, legit garbage time at the end of this one. There was a stretch in the third quarter, and I'm starting with positives, but I just wanted to point this out. They were great all game, except for in the third quarter. They missed like 3 or 4 open corner threes. And I spent a lot of time on Friday's show talking about how bad the Wolves, I think it was Friday, how they've struggled from the corners this year. And if they would just make corner threes, the offense would be that much better. Well, the third quarter on Friday night against the Knicks is a really good example of that because the offense was still generating the looks and the defense was playing great. They held the Knicks to 19 points in the third. But they only scored 18 points themselves, and this was still a one-possession game going to the fourth quarter. But then the Wolves ended up surging past the Knicks. They did a really good job overall against Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges, especially. Really good performance for the Wolves on Friday. So in terms of positives, let's start here. As long as we're talking about the Knicks, let's talk about a former Knick. Julius Randle was great. And, he's gotten a lot of flack and a lot of it deserved for what he's done and hasn't done in his time in Minnesota. And I know he didn't even score double figures in his return to MSG on Friday. Remember, they played there in the preseason, but he did not play in that game. Julius Randle was great. It's like as good of a single-digit scoring game that you can have, that certainly a player like Randle can have, who typically doesn't do much else besides score. I think that's fair to say. Like, if he's not scoring, what's he doing is normally what I would say. Well, he put up 8 points on 6 shots, missed both of his three-point attempts, but he had 7 rebounds and 6 assists. He did have 4 turnovers. But I thought the way he played was really important on Friday and staying within himself in what no doubt was an emotional return to MSG for him, the tribute, the whole thing. Like, for him to handle himself as well as he did and also play well defensively, move the basketball. I mean, like I thought he did a great job of drawing a crowd and getting rid of the ball when he did draw a crowd. And there were a couple times he had mismatches he tried to take advantage of. He did get to the line a couple of times, had 4 free throw attempts. It was just a really staying within himself Julius Randle performance. And then he turned around 24 hours later at home at Target Center and had a great game on Saturday against the Cavs. He had 20 points, 14 rebounds, and 9 assists. I believe he had 10 rebounds at halftime in this game. He had 3 offensive rebounds, 9 assists, and only 3 turnovers in this game for Julius. Only 1 of 5 on threes. So between the two games, he was 1 of 7 on 3-point attempts. But between the two games, he was 9 of 11 at the free throw line. So he got to the line 5.5 times on average between the two games. And he only took 12 shots to get his 20 points, despite missing 4 3-pointers on Saturday. This was a really efficient, effective, clean performance from Julius Randle. And again, I thought he was good defensively. Like, the number of times the dude got into a stance and actually defended, which I realized, like, I shouldn't have to be complimenting that, but like, he did that. He did a good job with it on both Friday and Saturday. And it was probably kind of one of the better 2-game stretches that Julius Randle's had in a Timberwolves uniform. And I thought he was a plus player for the Wolves in both games in terms of what he brought to the floor. And I wanted to highlight that because it was really refreshing to see. As long as we're talking about individual players, let's talk about Naz Reid. Naz was also great, and he's on this kind of extended run of just being awesome. Let's see, Friday night against the Knicks, he had 23 points on 11 shots. He was 6 of 6 on threes. He basically single-handedly destroyed the Knicks early in the fourth quarter of that game. He entered the game when he normally does in the first quarter, and I think he played the rest of the first half. Like, I think he played the whole second quarter, if I remember right, against the Knicks. And he's now scored in double figures in every game since January 6th, which is 8 straight games. And you want to go back even further, he's scored in double figures 11 of the last 12 games. Going back to Christmas, he had 6 points against the Mavs on Christmas. Only once since then did he score single digits, and that was 9 points in the loss to the Pistons a couple of weeks ago. So 23 points against the Knicks, which tied his season tied for his third most points in a game this season, and tied for his highest since he had 28 against Portland way back on November 12th. But this tied for the most points he scored in a game since then. 23 points on 8 of 11, 6 of 6 on threes. He had 8 rebounds in the game as well. Then Saturday against the Cavs, on the second night of the back-to-back, he's got 16 points on 6 of 12, 50% shooting from the floor, 4 of 8 on threes, which means it was a perfect 4 of 4 on twos. He had only 2 rebounds on Saturday, but he had 4 assists and 0 turnovers. He also had 2 blocks and 2 steals. So, I mean, logging 4 stocks plus 4 assists and no turnovers, that makes up for scoring less than he did on Saturday. And also 16 points is a perfectly fine game from Naz Reid. So between the two games, he had 5 assists and only 1 turnover. He had a total of 5 stocks between the two games, 10 rebounds, and 39 points on 23 shots. That is a really strong 2-game stretch for Naz Reid as well. And again, more like, take this back further. He's shot at least 50% from outside the arc in every game since January 7th. So that's the last 6 games. He's been better than 50% from the 3-point line. That's awesome. Like, now for the season, he and actually, you want to, like, last 10 games, he's 56% on threes. For the season, he's now at 39.9% on threes. So he's getting back up to where we want to see Naz Reid in terms of his overall 3-point percentage. Remember, last year he was just a shade over 41%, which was a career high by far. But now he's back to that 40% level. And it feels like what Naz Reid did toward the end of last year, which kind of cemented that 6th man of the year. Like, his scoring is basically where it was last year. He's only 0.2 of a point per game lower. He's only 1/10 of a rebound per game lower. His assists are up per game. Blocks and steals are identical. And now he's just a hair behind shooting both 3-point percentage and overall field goal percentage. So, like, he plays like this the rest of the season, and a repeat, 6th man of the year award is not, we could go back to back here with this. Now, the Wolves record being what it is, and, others in the league might beg to differ, but he's going to be in that conversation again if he's playing like this. Just a really, really strong stretch, a couple of games there for Naz Reid. Let's see. I've got a couple more positives to list, and then we're going to go through the negatives a little bit more quickly because this is a more positive. I feel really good about this weekend of games. But a couple things negatively will hit. I've got 2 more good things, and we'll close with Wolves-Grizzlies. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Prizepicks. Basketball season is heating up. There's no better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars in with Prizepicks. Whether you're a diehard fan or just love some friendly competition, Prizepicks makes it fun and easy to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. Here's how it works. Pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. If you think LeBron's going to drop 30 points or maybe Luka's going to get more than 8 assists, Prizepicks lets you make your predictions and put your money where your mouth is in just 60 seconds. Let me tell you, it's a blast to use Prizepicks. Like, for instance, any given night, you could say, look, Anthony Edwards is going to score more than 25 points. And that's probably a pretty good number to take there. It's the kind of action that it adds to your experience watching a Wolves game. With Prizepicks flex play option, even if one of your picks doesn't hit, if it has a bit of an off night, you can still double your money. Plus, once you hit, you get your money fast, sometimes as quick as 15 minutes. It's honestly the best way to keep the game exciting. Now's the perfect time to join. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prizepicks. Run your game. All right. Couple more positives. Let's talk about Rob Dillingham. Friday against the Knicks, Dillingham was great. He played like 11, 12 rotation minutes, a little bit of garbage time at the end. He was awesome in the first half. When this thing was kind of a back and forth, like first quarter, Wolves were +7 after the first quarter. They're up by 7. They lost the second quarter, but they needed to keep pace with the Knicks, who just exploded. Like, the Knicks had 38 points in the second quarter. They scored 21 or less in the other 3 quarters. And part of that was because Rob Dillingham was on the floor. Like, to be clear, defensively, it was pretty obvious. Like, that's the concern. For everybody clamoring for Rob Dillingham to play, this was the concern for him, period, as a prospect, was his size and defensive limitations, which are linked, certainly. Like, if he had been, and I think I said this around the time of the draft, and I think I had Tyler Metcalf on from No Ceilings. We talked about, like, if he was like 6'4", he would have been probably the first pick of the draft. Like, that's how good he is offensively, skill set wise. That's absolutely true. But because of his size, he's easily picked off defensively, and he can get lost in the wash. And it's not, I don't think, for lack of effort. Occasionally, you'd like someone of that size. We talked about this in the draft. I don't want to rehash too much of it, but he has to show the effort to get through screens, right? So, like, you have say D'Angelo Russell, who's another, a recent obvious Wolves example, who's got great size for a point guard, modest athlete, good length, but he didn't fight through screens. He didn't try to get through screens, and that's always been an issue. But you get like a Jordan McLaughlin who's 6 feet tall, maybe, and does try to get through screens, and he's a more effective defender than D'Angelo Russell. And there's pros to D'Lo's, frame and size versus a Jordan McLaughlin size, and you balance out like the effort level and the ability to get skinny and get small and get through screens. Dillingham lives somewhere in that like combination where the effort's not where McLaughlin's is, which is a problem. And he's actually smaller than McLaughlin, but he's more athletic, and I think he could. There's absolutely, obviously, way more upside, even defensively, I would say. But like, he's got to play like Jordan McLaughlin did if he's going to be that size. Like, he's going to have to figure out how to, navigate screens, how to be effective to get over screens, to get through screens, to contest shots effectively under control, all that stuff. He just has to figure it out. He got exploited defensively against the Knicks. But on the plus side, which is what we're focusing on here, he was awesome offensively. Was super confident, letting it fly, had 9 points on 4 of 6 shooting, 1 of 2 on threes, had a nice pump fake, dribble, sidestep three-pointer from the left wing, had 3 assists. He also had 2 turnovers. But I thought he looked really confident and good, like strong passing, had a couple nice passes that weren't assists. I think were hockey assist type passes that led to a pass that led to a score. Just a really strong performance. And then against the Cavs, it was a bit of a mixed bag. His first stint against the Cavs on Saturday was bad. Like, he didn't play well in the first half against the Cavs. And it's easy to forget that because he was so good at the end. And then when he first entered the game, I think it was third quarter against the Cavs, he was so bad for like a minute that Finch pulled him in favor of putting Anthony Edwards back on the floor, even though he'd just come out to try and get the Wolves a little bit of traction offensively as the Cavs were making their run that ultimately put them up by 20 plus and led to the Wolves losing by 7 on Saturday. But then after that, which was kind of pseudo garbage time. I mean, everybody was playing their starters. Like, there was no true garbage time in the Wolves Cavs game, and the Wolves ended up making it a 3-possession game at the end. But this was up over 20 points with like 8-ish minutes to play. And so, admittedly, the Cavs weren't playing as hard defensively, but Dillingham was a big reason for the Wolves getting kind of sort of back into that game and at least making it a little bit interesting at the end. And Chris Finch talked about this after the game, and it made sense. Like, the element of Dillingham's game, the upside of what he can do, and what I would say, this is me, not Chris Finch talking, I would look at this as a high variance play, right? It's the whole like principle of, if you know that you're the underdog, you have to lean into something that's more high variance. In this case, that's not the right terminology, because they weren't the underdog. They were literally down by 20. It was a very like a 1% chance they were going to pull this out or less, right? So what do? You put a guy that's fast, can make threes, can generate offense quickly, can be a shot in the arm, and maybe he's bad defensively, but you just got to get steals and you're going to foul and all that stuff anyway. So it's not a normal half court game anymore. It's just you're playing fast and trying to score as many points as you can in a short period of time. And that's why you go with Dillingham. And he played well under those circumstances. He actually ended up fouling out in 18 minutes, but a lot of that was just playing the foul game at the end. But I mean, in his 18 minutes, he ended up being a +3. He's one of only 3 Timberwolves had a positive plus-minus because of that run toward the end. But again, he showed all the things that we know are positive about his game. 2 of 4 on threes, creative with the dribble, really good at setting the offense up and resetting when he gets into a tough spot. It kind of probing, like the sort of thing that the Wolves haven't had a guard do that, like since old Jamal Crawford, right? Like they haven't had these high usage, dynamic, athletic guards that also create for others. Like that was always kind of the idea with D'Lo, but he never played fast enough to do it. And he always was really looking for his own shot. And Dillingham's just a more fluid, it's funny because he is a shoot first guy, right? Like he is more of the Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams type mold where he's looking for his own shot. But to this point, he's been a really willing passer, and he probably knows that that's also in part his ticket to keep getting playing time. So really strong, overall between the two games, right? Offensively against the Knicks, some defensive issues against the Cavs, bad first stint and a half, but then he was great at the end. And overall, the positives that we saw are exactly what we're looking for from Rob Dillingham. So strong weekend of games overall for Rob. My last positive quickly is the fight the Wolves showed in both games. I talked about the Knicks game. The Wolves were, had a tough defensive second quarter. The Knicks were on fire. It's a 5-point game at halftime 4-point game at halftime when it should have been the Wolves up by more. Third quarter, they miss a ton of corner threes, miss a ton of shots, period. But the defense is good enough, and they're still only up 3 points going to the fourth quarter. But they persevered through kind of that muck part of the game where they had to call timeouts. It was kind of a danger zone on the road at MSG. Jalen Brunson, going downhill. The Garden's starting to go crazy. Like, you worry a little bit about what's, campaign. They withstood this crazy, 18 points in 7 minutes or whatever campaign had early in the game, made all those threes. There were just some of those adversity moments that they could have easily caved, and they pushed through it. And they had a really strong finish to the game and had the massive fourth quarter outscoring the Knicks 35-21. And then against the Cavs, they caved a little in the third quarter, but remember, the Cavs are 35-6. Like, this is the best team in the league by far. Coming off a loss against OKC, it's tied at halftime. And then you have a dud of a third quarter for Minnesota, a dud of a start to the fourth quarter. You're down 20 plus, and they easily could have caved. But they actually kept playing hard, and there was never really a moment where it was like, they stopped playing. It was just the Cavs made some tough shots, and the Cavs are really good. The Cavs they had actually ended up only shooting 35% from three. I thought it would be a higher number. I think they just missed a lot of shots toward the end of the game. But they were just, all of a sudden, they couldn't miss. And I don't fault the Wolves as much for that. There were some lineup things in there. We could talk about, I think it was end of the third quarter. Finch had a lineup without Ant that was really struggling, and I thought he maybe could have navigated that a little bit differently. But it was more the Cavs being good than the Wolves being bad, and then for the Wolves to still show the fight against a really good team that still had all their guys on the floor and make this thing respectable at the end. There's something to be said for that. And I know the Wolves are supposed to be a finals contender, and we shouldn't be talking about moral victories. But it's okay to still find a silver lining. And I think that's what we have here is 2 games against 2 really good teams on back-to-back nights in a really tough situation without DiVincenzo, who's been playing so well. And they still find a way to be really competitive, to beat the Knicks by double figures and be competitive against the Cavs, beyond competitive against the Cavs, and push back after getting down by 20 plus. I think that's all really positive. All right, let's do this. We'll talk about a couple negatives real quick, and then we'll spend just a couple minutes on Wolves-Grizzlies. That's how we'll close the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. A lot of fun games this weekend. Of course, the Lions going down, the Chiefs predictably getting a win. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate. The variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, real quick, a couple of negatives from the weekend. Number one on the list is the defensive rebounding and the consistency, the lack of consistency with rebounding the basketball. The Wolves give up 15 offensive rebounds to the Knicks. 4 to OG Anunoby, 3 to Mikal Bridges. Okay. Yeah. Precious Achiuwa had 4. Jericho Sims had 2. Oh, they also gave up 2 to Josh Hart. So take out Sims and Achiuwa. They each had 6 combined. Guards and wings had a combined 9 offensive rebounds. Anunoby, Bridges, and Hart combined for 9 offensive rebounds for the Knicks on Friday night. That's a problem. It's been a continuous problem for the Wolves this year. Saturday, the Cavaliers had 13 offensive rebounds. A lot of those were from the wings. Jared Allen only had 1 offensive rebound. Donovan Mitchell had 2. Darius Garland had 2. Dean Wade had 2. Karis LeVert had 1. George Niang had 3. Max Strus off the bench had 2 offensive rebounds. It's these long rebounds, which are like against the Cavs. Part of the problem was I didn't think the Wolves were getting out far enough on shooters. And overall, I said this a minute ago, like Mitchell ended up being 4 of 15 from outside the arc. Dean Wade was 2 of 7. Sam Merrill was 0 for 2. Like they did an okay job. Karis LeVert was 0 for 3 of getting out on some of these guys, but I thought they could have pushed them out even further, and they weren't aggressive enough going over screens and closing out to the touch on some of these guys consistently. But part of that was they ended up in no man's land, and these long rebounds were in no man's land, and they're effectively 50-50 balls. We've talked about this time and time again, and the Wolves guards have to be better at rebounding in the middle of the floor. Like against the Knicks, Anthony Edwards had 13 rebounds. Like he did his part. Naz had 8 rebounds. He did his part. Rudy only had 6 in 34 minutes. But again, against the Knicks, it was also a fair amount of those longer rebounds. The Cavs was an even bigger issue. That was the one that was pretty frustrating and kind of led to the early stages of this big push that the Cavs had bridging the third and fourth quarter that put them up by 20 plus. Julius Randle had 14 boards in the game. Rudy had 12. Combined, they had 21 defensive rebounds. Nobody else on the Wolves had more than 4 defensive rebounds in this game. Jaden had 4. Ant had 3. Conley had 2. Naz only had 2 in 26 minutes. Nikhil only had 1 rebound. He really struggled. He was 1 of 10 shooting and only had 1 defensive rebound in that game. Rob Dillingham played 18 minutes, didn't get a single rebound. This is where we talk about the margins where things can be won and lost. And I've talked about this before. It really adds up. Like, I get that these guards are all going to have low rebound rates. They're all going to not get very many per game. But in games like this, where there's a lot of these intermediate rebounds available, it really, really adds up. Like Jaden, 5 rebounds in 38 minutes. You'd like that to be higher, but from what we've seen from him, fine. Okay. But you can't have Conley and Dillingham combined for 3 rebounds. Like, you've got to get a couple more than that. Ant, by the way, only had 3 rebounds, and I don't think he had any until the fourth quarter. It's just got to be more consistent. And a little bit of his schematic, like I talked about, pressing up more out on the perimeter and then crashing down for those rebounds instead of leaking out. That's probably the biggest thing. I think Gobert gets into the bad habit of back-tapping defensive rebounds when in reality, like, just do your best to grab them and maybe you'll get fouled, maybe you won't. But like batting them out towards an open shooter isn't a great idea. Offensively, fine. Usually that works out. Occasionally you'll back tap an offensive rebound and the other team gets a fast break, but I'd rather like that gamble makes more sense to me than back tapping a defensive rebound. So it's a combination of factors, but it's something that continues to be an issue for the Wolves. Related, the perimeter defense against the Cavs, or at least the consistency of it. Again, Donovan Mitchell, like, I mean, if you hold him to 36 points, a lot of points, but on 27 shots, not too bad. They only forced 7 Cavs turnovers. It's hard to force the Cavs to commit turnovers. I thought the consistency of the Wolves perimeter defense was spotty at best. If you force Darius Garland to shoot under 50% and Donovan Mitchell to shoot under 50% for the field, like, that's not too bad. But there were moments where it was just a little bit too easy. I thought that consistency should have been better. Then the last thing would be the Ant roller coaster. He was great in the Garden on Friday. 36 points, 13 rebounds, 7 assists. He did have 6 turnovers, but he was 8 of 13 on 3. Had that awesome and one, the dunk, like played great. The Cavs game was pretty rough at times. Great first quarter, rough for most of the rest of the game for Ant. 28 points on 22 shots. A bit of a roller coaster, but he was great Friday. And overall, like the last couple of weeks, he's played much better than he did for most of the first couple months of the season. So just a bit of a roller coaster for Ant, which comes with the territory a little bit, but you like him to be a little more consistent. All right, real quickly, Wolves-Grizzlies today. It's a matinee game. It is a 1:30 game, I believe. Let's see. Make sure I get the right time. I think it's 1:30 today. Yeah, 1:30 on TNT and all the True TV and the Max channels and everything. Wolves-Grizzlies, of course, the Wolves just played the Grizzlies, a week and a half ago, just over a week ago. And that was a devastating game where the Wolves really outplayed the Grizzlies in almost every facet and ended up losing by a bucket. They messed up their last couple possessions. Then the Grizzlies lost the Rockets by a bucket, and then they beat the Spurs by 14, and then they beat the Spurs by 28. So the Grizzlies continue to be great. Of course, Ja Morant came back a couple weeks ago, although he didn't play, or a couple weeks ago, the game against the Wolves was his first game back. He did not play against the Spurs in their 28-point win. And he, at the moment, as I'm recording this, Ja Morant is questionable for the Wolves game on Monday. So we will see if Ja Morant plays, but he's, as of now, listed as questionable in the game. Now, of course, they just beat the Spurs by 28 without him. They've obviously survived without him this year to the tune of a 27-15 record. Their only losses here the last couple weeks, the Rockets twice, the Warriors and the Kings and the Thunder. So mostly just losing to good teams. Still, this is a matchup the Wolves can do okay with. The last time they played the Grizzlies, the Wolves outshot the Grizzlies outside the arc. They attempted one more three and made one more three. They had the same number of free throw attempts as them. They did turn it over 5 more times than them. But where they lost this game was they gave up 21 offensive rebounds to the Grizzlies and also those inopportune turnovers. And the Grizzlies ended up with 25 more shot attempts than the Timberwolves in this game, which is just nuts. 25 more shot attempts, and they had 15 more offensive rebounds, 14 more offensive rebounds than the Wolves. So that's why they lost by a bucket. The late game execution wasn't great, but that's the biggest issue here. And with or without Ja Morant, this is a Grizzlies team that is a handful. They're a top 5 offensive team. They're a top 5 defensive team. It's them and the Thunder are the only team. Actually, the Thunder, according to Clean the Glass, are now 6th in offense. So actually, Memphis is the only team in the entire NBA that's top 5 on both sides of the floor. Boston's 3rd on offense, 6th on defense. OKC's 1st on defense, 6th on offense. There's a couple other teams that are top 10 in both. Actually, it's just Cleveland and Houston are the other top 10 teams, or the other teams that are top 10 in both. Memphis is top 5 in both. They do turn it over a lot, and that was part of the problem last game is the Wolves managed to somehow turn it over more times than Memphis. Now, Memphis also turns you over a lot defensively. They're a really good defensive team that is great at turning you over, and the Wolves have been a little bit better with that lately, like against the Knicks on Friday. I think they only had against the Knicks, they had 15 turnovers. It was the Cavs game. The Wolves only had 7 turnovers. So in general, the Wolves have improved there a little bit, but you can't have these live ball turnovers against a team like Memphis that is happy to play fast if they get the opportunity, especially if Ja Morant's on the floor, and they can kill you from deep as well. Offensively, they're great when they're not turning it over, and they're going to be really hard to slow down. Memphis also will foul you. They're aggressive defensively, so the Wolves need to be aggressive going to the basket, and that's going to be big for Anthony Edwards. Remember, neither Ant or Ja played well when these two teams played like a week and a half ago. In that game, Ant had 15 points on 13 shots and actually didn't make a three-pointer, and Ja had 12 points on 19 shots and also didn't make a three-pointer. It was Jaren Jackson Jr. that had 33 and 8, and between he and who was it? Was it Jack? I think it was Jaren Jackson Jr. that contested Ant's attempted three-point shot at the end of the game. Remember, he blew up the play. They didn't run the inbound play correctly, and that was that. So it'll be an interesting game between the two teams, with or without Ja Morant. I think this is probably a game in Memphis. My guess is the Grizzlies are going to be favored. You know what? I'm saying that. I don't know that FanDuel has a line on it because we don't know about Ja's availability. Yeah, there's no line as of yet, But anyway, should be a fun game. I'm guessing if there's no Ja, the Grizzlies will still probably be favored by 1.5 or so. With Ja, they're probably favored, I don't know, 4.5, something like that. So we will have the post-game pod for you on Tuesday. Of course, the live postcast will be available on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube with Jack and Luke. Check that out following the game, and I'll be back early Tuesday with the post-game podcast. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder to sign up for the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com, your one-stop shop for all things Timberwolves. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.